This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Joe Walsh.
Former Congressman Joe Walsh here. So there's a group I recently found and have become a really big fan of. Starts With Us. They're a movement working to overcome the extreme political and cultural division in America. You can find them online at startswith.us. I love them because they're showing people it's possible to have real, meaningful, productive conversations with people you disagree with. I'm a big fan of this. This is what I try to do on my podcast because right now in America, we have two major political parties that are at each other's throats. And the most dangerous aspect of this is that it's led many of us to avoid having hard conversations with people we disagree with. We're afraid to have these hard conversations, afraid to deal with the tough stuff, so we walk away. But to save our democracy, we have to stick around. I mean, if we all walk away from the table, then who the hell is sticking around to figure things out? This is what I so love and admire about the work that Starts With Us is doing. They're sticking around. They are the movement for people like you and me who want to fight the extreme political and cultural division in this country. Because guess what? People like us, we are in the majority. Starts With Us found that 87% of Americans are tired of how politically and culturally divided we are. So yeah, I'm not just a fan, I'm part of the movement too. And if you're listening to me right now, I want you to join the movement as well. Go to startswith.us and get their free newsletter. Sign up for their free newsletter. Get involved. Start there. Startswith.us. Thanks. Hey, Joe Walsh, former Congressman Joe Walsh with you, White Flag with Joe Walsh. Watch this on YouTube. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, White Flag with Joe Walsh. Listen to this wherever you listen to podcasts. White Flag with Joe Walsh. There were three major Supreme Court rulings last week, all important, all fairly monumental, all interesting. The one I found most interesting was the Colorado web designer ruling. Michaelson, who I follow on Twitter, and I read his stuff in Rolling Stone. I see him on CNN all the time. I'm on CNN all the time, and I love people who go on CNN all the time and are just say what they believe. That's Jay, and Jay writes for Rolling Stone. He's a contributor on CNN. Jay, welcome, by the way, my friend. I wanted to bring you on because you have, in the last week, spoken to and written about this Colorado web designer ruling in a way that I just haven't heard anybody on either side do it. I find this to be a complicated issue, and I wanted to put out a podcast that would explain it to people. The audience for this podcast, my friend, ranges from far right to far left and everybody in between. So welcome. And by the way, everybody should follow Jay on Twitter. He's also a fascinating follow. Read his stuff in Rolling Stone. His politics are not my politics, though maybe we're closer than we think.
We're the opposite of the horseshoe. You know, the horseshoes with
Yes.
far left and far right come together. So we're like just the other end of the horseshoe, over here somewhere.
I love that. Thank you. And I agree. Start here, Jay. I want to drill down on this ruling with you. I'll say at the outset that I supported the ruling. I think ultimately you didn't, but man, you had an interesting take. Can we start with this whole issue of standing and the hypothetical couple or man or same-sex group, the couple that brought there seems to be a lot of first misinformation on the left about this whole issue of standing. Was there standing for this case?
Yes and no, which is a fun answer.
I knew you were going to say that.
So I think actually I want to take one half step even further back,
Yeah.
which is to recognize that on left and right, almost all of these high profile Supreme Court cases are a kind of theater. There's in the public narrative, we say, well, there was this let's go to a previous Colorado case where there was a cake baker.
The baker.
Right. And because that case was actually more clear in terms of what really happened. Well, there's this religious baker and he's operating his bakery, and a gay couple came in and he said, no, thank you. And he turned them away, and then they sued. It never is like that. And again, this is both right and left. You always want to find, and I clerked for Judge Garland, who's on the DC Circuit, friends with plaintiff Supreme Court clerks. You always want to find the best plaintiff you can to bring the lawsuit that gets you the kind of change you want. So, for example, let's take a right-wing example in the Hobby Lobby case, which won a religious exemption to the Obamacare contraception mandate. So Hobby Lobby, which is a Christian-owned, family-held corporation, they'd been covering contraception for years. They had no idea. They didn't care about this issue, right? It was when the Beckett Fund and Alliance Defending Freedom went to them and said, did you know that the government is mandating you to carry contraception coverage? Then all of a sudden they got upset about that, right? So it wasn't like there was, and that, again, is true across the spectrum. So it was true in this case, and that I think that's really helpful to frame the weirdness of this case, because this isn't an outlier, right? So the Alliance Defending Freedom, activist organization on the right, seeking religious exemptions, ultimately seeking to overturn same-sex marriage and a variety of other Supreme Court decisions. So they know that the right strategy is to go bit by bit by bit. And we saw the success of this with abortion, right? So the full frontal attack on Roe versus Wade failed twice, right? And so activists pivoted, and they're like, instead of just trying to overturn the thing straight ahead, we're going to carve out more and more and more and more. And so you saw that over a period of time while transforming the court, and eventually the frontal attack obviously won last year. So that strategy works, and it works on the left, right? And so, I worked as an LGBTQ activist for 10 years. And there again, we didn't start with marriage, and we started with sort of either non-discrimination or overturning the sodomy laws bit by bit by bit by bit, and also Defensive Marriage Act, things like that. So in this case, coming to this one, the Alliance Defending Freedom was looking for the next case that would be like the successor to the wedding cake baker. So if the listeners don't know, a few years ago it was a Colorado baker, would not do a same-sex wedding cake. His case, he won, but basically on a technicality. The Colorado Civil Rights Commission didn't take his religious argument seriously. They're like, well, this is just a pretext for bigotry. And that case, even I agreed, and some of the liberal justices agreed, that's not how it's supposed to go. This guy had a sincere religious claim, and that needed to be taken seriously. So it won, but it didn't really win.
It was a limited ruling.
It really was. I mean, and there again, though, this was the template for me in the response to this case, which we'll get to in a few minutes. Again, even then, there were people who were like, this is a license to discriminate. This is the end of the world. And that's not what that case held. So now we all knew, everybody knew the best case for the right on this debate between religious belief and non-discrimination norms would be on speech. Because we have a lot of free speech norms in this country. And if you just think intuitively, the government forcing someone to write something or say something they don't believe, like that offends our democratic norms. I don't think that's really what was happening in this case, but just let's keep that frame. That is a clear, and Justice Gorsuch wrote that way in the opinion. That's un-American. We do not want our government forcing people to say things of any kind. And that's what this was ostensibly in that framing of the case. So we all knew, what's it going to be? It's going to be something involving writing. So they found this web designer. So the weirdness of the case is, which you alluded to. Now I'm finally getting to your actual.
No, Jay, that's great.
The weirdness of this case is it was more fake than usual. So first, the web designer went to the Alliance Defending Freedom, using this web designer, sued to say, well, she's afraid to go into the web design business because she's going to get sued. And the Colorado Civil Rights Commission is going to come after her and say, you have to serve same-sex, you have to make wedding websites for gay weddings as well as straight ones.
Now, Jay, let me stop you there for a second, then jump on me. And by the way, in this conversation, I'm not a dope. I'm fairly knowledgeable, but man, you are my expert. So I'm going to be asking you questions because I'm going to learn shit from you.
Keep that flattery up. That's going to work.
No, I mean that. I mean that. So this group comes and grabs her, the web designer. But in their defense, and they're looking for a case. Her setting up this business she would have been a pretty credible threat for prosecution under Colorado's law, no?
Only if an actual customer had come to her and said and gotten turned away. That's how it works. You have to make a complaint. The state isn't going to just come back and they say, hey, we see you have this sign, that you say you're not going to, like, there has to actually be a case or a controversy in the legal
So what is then, explain to me,
So-
what's the notion of a pre-enforcement challenge?
So this was so she first tried to do a pre-enforcement challenge on just setting with no customer and saying, I'm about to set up this business, but I want to know that I can do that without being subject to these laws. That case she lost for lack of standing. So then they reconfigured the case and said, yeah, we got this dude, and he said he does want a gay wedding website, and she's afraid to say no. She does, and that's the pre-enforcement challenge. So she didn't wait for the customer to complain to Colorado and then launch the enforcement action, but she did get this customer. Turns out, fake. It was not a real customer. But the craziest thing about this entire part of the story to me is that we didn't notice this sooner. Right, the New Republic broke this story 2 days before the Supreme Court.
But back up, Jay. Back up. Two points. It's interesting because I didn't know that, Jay. I thought she didn't get turned down on standing for her first pre-enforcement challenge. I didn't know that. But isn't it true that this fake customer came to them after, like, she began to get media on her complaint?
The fake customer
like,
is straight. The fake customer is straight. He's a liberal guy. He's married to a woman. He did not ask for any. So it is very, so, we were talking about this last night on the CNN show that I'm on, and none of us around the table could remember a similar case to this where there was just a totally fake. Usually you find somebody. There's plenty of conservative gay people out there. Find a gay conservative who is offended or something. But a lot of the discussion on social media that I've been part of, and people have said, well, let's just leave it to the market. Like, okay, she's a homophobic web designer. If people don't like that, then they won't use her business. She's going to go out of business. It's going to be bad for business. Well, but that is not actually what was going on. Like, yeah, the market may well have spoken. The market didn't have a chance to speak in this case. But again, I don't want to sound like I'm blaming the right for doing something that the left doesn't do. The left does this also. Well, everybody we search for the best court, we search for the best plaintiff, we search for the best. What is fake is the claim that these are dumb gay people. They should have just gone to somewhere else. I can assure you, I will not go to an anti-gay web designer to make my corny ass, gay wedding website. I'm going to find a gay web designer who's going to make it nicer. Anyway, but more seriously, it's not the case that you could just, why not just go down to the next store or something like that.
I want to get off of standing because I really want to go into the case, the ruling. Why did nobody make an issue of standing? The federal judge ruled she had standing. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled. The majority and the minority on the Supreme Court ruled. No party challenged her standing.
On the facts as presented, I also wouldn't challenge her standing because, she was in business. Here comes a customer. She said she wants to say no to the customer. She's afraid to say no to the customer. Now it's not some hypothetical thing of like, I might have a customer. Now she has a customer. She's like, oh shit, I don't want to say no. I can curse on the podcast.
And she didn't know the customer was fake.
Is that right?
Or who?
I think
she
I don't know what
she
knew. I mean, somebody knew. The ADF's lawyers had to know. And it's still very unclear. There's a ton we don't know. Like, why did they do it this way? Again, it's not hard to find George Santos. He's a conservative gay dude. Like, have him go to have him be the customer who knocks on the door and says, I want the website. Anyway, it's very bizarre that this whole thing happened. There's sort of and I think there's more to be discovered about it. But no, if this were a real customer who had actually come to her and she actually was afraid of saying no because of an enforcement action, that's a standard pre-enforcement challenge, right? So
did the federal judge and the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, did they all, in making their ruling and in saying there was standing, they assumed this couple was a real customer?
Got it right based on wrong information. Yeah. And I just do not understand, how those of us in the media didn't check out this story sooner. I'm amazed that it went this far, because it wouldn't have gone this far. Especially, there's a perjury prosecution in here somewhere, right? Somebody somewhere signed a deposition, saying that this person came, and so that is perjury. Like, and that person should be prosecuted for perjury. It's crazy. I hesitate to say too much about it, only because what I definitely know is that we don't know the full part of this weird story.
It's we'll drop this part of it. It's fascinating to me because what I've read is, and the New Republic broke it. Then she didn't know the email was fake. The email potential business, that the sham client isn't even mentioned in the ruling. The email to her, the web designer, was sent the day after her complaint was reported in the media. And I've read people on the right side of the aisle who have said this was a prank against her.
Oh,
but but that wouldn't matter necessarily.
No, I think I wouldn't want people to get the sense that this is central to the case. It's because they would have found a customer. The ADF is a big organization. They would have, like I said, they would have found a conservative gay couple who thinks that there should be religious freedom or whatever, and to go and do the pantomime. That's why I described this at the top as like it's theater. And what they're trying to do is erode the equality of same-sex marriage. And again, the left does the same thing, right? That is their stated goal. That's what the ADF wants. They want, they want to undo Obergefell, and this is a way to chip away at it. And
is it where you say, Jay, then focusing on standing and the sham client is the wrong place to focus on?
I don't know, wrong. It's distracting. It's such a weird distraction that I can't help but, what did we spend, 12 minutes on it? Like it's very bizarre. Like I've been, I covered the Supreme Court for the Daily Beast for 8 years. Now I'm doing it for Rolling Stone. I've been doing this a long time, and I have never seen a case like this. It's just crazy. It would be like if Brown versus the Board of Education, like there were no Brown, like there was no person who actually was subject to segregation. Like that would be crazy. Like there wasn't.
That's a great point. And you're probably right that we're going to continue to learn more about this sham client. My hunch is we're going to learn that the web designer had no idea he was a sham client. Let's move on. You wrote a great piece in the Daily Beast, either earlier this week or last week, and you said a number of really, I thought, cool things in this 6-3 ruling that allowed the web designer to refuse to design websites for same-sex couples. You said that Gorsuch basically said, you can't turn away gays. You can only turn away gay weddings. And then, Jay, you had this great line. If you see that distinction, then the opinion makes sense to you. If you don't see the distinction between that, you can turn away gays, but you can't turn away gay weddings, then the ruling's preposterous. Explain that.
Right. What Gorsuch said is that the web designer is not, and now we're going to forget everything we said for the first 12 minutes. We're going to pretend as though the web designer is really, this is all real. The web designer is not discriminating against gay people. And in fact, if you're a gay person who wants a different website, happy birthday or something, she'll make you that website. It's only, so it's about, basically this is like what's called in the law a status versus conduct distinction. So so in that framing, I could go to, my husband and I could go to her and she's not discriminating against us. She's discriminating against the seller, or not discriminating. She's choosing not to do a website for a same-sex wedding.
Does that make sense to you?
Yes and no. Again, like I said at the top, I get that. And one thing that I think we'll develop a little bit more in a couple of minutes is I think that's an important limitation to the case. This only applies where there's a certain kind of speech that's being ordered by the government. It is not a blanket license to discriminate, as many of the on the left have said. However,
and by the way, this is why I love you. Kudos to Jay Michaelson, because you have been on that soapbox for a week. And you have such credibility because of your beliefs, where you come from, that so many people on the left said, oh my God, it's now legal to discriminate against the LGBTQ community.
And thank you. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I'm not doing that to get the court off the hook. I'm not interested in saying
Yes.
like that is not my motivation here. I am actually interested in more equality and more equity for LGBTQ people. And I think when we give away our rights to those who want to take them away voluntarily, it's like we're complying in advance, which is that saying about authoritarianism, don't comply in advance.
Yeah.
If that's that, because we create a social reality. So if a bunch of organizations and celebrities go around and say there's now a license to discriminate, I can discriminate against anyone who I want and so forth, that starts to create, not in some weird way, but in a very real social way, that creates that social reality. That creates the reality that like now I can turn away whoever we want. And we saw this after that cake shop case. Right. There was a pizzeria, and I forget, it was either Ohio or Illinois, put a sign like no gays allowed. And that person, they were wrong under the law, but they were not wrong in the popular conception. There was this idea that now you can turn away whoever you want, which I would say, by the way, like that also does undercut Justice Gorsuch's argument. Like his claim is that this is really just about speech. She's not discriminating against gay people, but it has already been received on both right and left as a license to discriminate, which I think is both inaccurate and also really
and it goes, Jay, to the fact that this is a difficult concept. Like this, to me, this case was the head-on collision between free speech and our public accommodation laws. Most Americans are utterly clueless about this.
And I also, this is a hard case. And I think people on the LGBT activist side also knew this. It's why, this was why everyone knew that the next case was going to be about some kind of free speech. Maybe it would have been, when you get to some other expressive arts, like, so you see these in weddings all the time. So like the caterer, for example. Yeah, that's an expressive act. Is it speech? Somewhere in between. Is it really so bad to, maybe if you're writing, congratulations on your wedding on a cake or something. But if you're just putting out, hot dogs or something, it's not, it's not really speech, right? Or florists.
Is there, Jay, is there that distinction, Jay? And I go back to the baker, because to me, the Colorado baker a few years ago, I always thought it was a speech issue too. Like a same-sex couple comes in and says, design a cake for our wedding. Like I even think, okay, there's a difference between bake a cake and design a cake and write it.
Yeah.
Like, is that what we're getting down to?
I mean, in a way it's ridiculous, but also not ridiculous, right? Like I get, I'm also a rabbi, right? I understand that I understand the sincere religious objection to writing something that you don't believe, right? And there are a lot of different answers that you get to that. So a lot of times people just attack the religious belief. I'm not going to do that. Obviously, I think her religious belief is wrong, and I wrote a book about that. And I can plug the book. It's called God versus Gay. It suggests that most religious values support inclusion for gay and lesbian
God versus
people.
gay.
God versus gay, ? The religious case for equality.
Awesome.
And so I think she's wrong about that, but that's not for the court to decide, right? We live in an ostensibly secular democracy. I don't want the courts policing religious beliefs. Okay. So some people are like, well, she shouldn't have opened up a web design business. But that doesn't seem quite right either, right? Really? So there can't be any right-wing Christian bakers and web designers and whatever else. Like you have to, like that also seems off, right? That doesn't seem like the world we want to live in, that if you have certain religious beliefs, and even if they're not sincere, whatever, you have certain professed religious beliefs, you can't enter certain professions, right? I think, but then there are some other, Justice Sotomayor in her dissent said a lot of things that she could have done. She could have said, every website that I create has a beautiful seal in the corner that says God ordained holy matrimony is between one man and one woman. She could put a Bible quote on every single page. That would pretty successfully screen out any gay people from getting right. I mean, that would be it's sort of a cutesy way almost to get around it, but it's actually quite sensible, right? There are plenty of ways, but no, she insisted. She said, no, I want to be able to put the sign on the door. And so, we got a minute ago, you were saying was that distinction between status and conduct. And here's where I really do think it breaks down.
Huh.
So I'm going to give a kind of incendiary example because it's going to be based on race. So suppose that I have, and I'll backtrack a moment. In the late 1960s, there were religious objections to desegregation laws. There were religious beliefs held by many right-wing Christians that God separated the different races on the different continents, that there was not supposed to be mixing between the races, definitely not marriage and not sex either between the races. And this appears to have been a sincerely held racist religious belief, right? And again, from the secular perspective, as a court, we don't question the sincerity of somebody's religious belief. They say that they have this belief about about race. That's their religious belief. So that came up. It came up in a famous sort of case about a motel that was running a restaurant, the Heart of Atlanta Motel. It said, we just have a religious belief that blacks and whites shouldn't sit together. So now imagine today, and so forth. So under the logic that we're discriminating against the act and not the person. So suppose a mixed race couple comes to my Airbnb and says, hey, we want to rent your Airbnb. And I say, well, I want to make sure I can't condone you having sex while you're staying at the Airbnb. And you probably will. And so I'm not discriminating against you, black person and white person. I'm only saying I can't support this act, which is forbidden by my interpretation of my religion. Clearly, I think, now I want to say that case does not involve free speech, so it's different in that way, but in the status conduct question, clearly, I think that distinction breaks down, right? So like you can now have a sign on your door saying, no mixed race couples, by which I don't mean discriminating against black people, but I do mean discriminating against miscegenation or interracial sex or something, which I think is that clearly breaks down.
Jay, that's a really interesting example. And as you just said, you got out of kind of the free speech realm and you got into religious liberty realm, which makes me think, and correct me if I'm wrong, this Colorado web designer is primarily a speech issue. Does that then portend that there may then be another kind of a case where it is about religious beliefs? Because there's no speech involved, as far as I'm concerned, free speech in a B&B owner not allowing a mixed couple to stay there.
Right. No, I agree. And that's the next case. And again, I said earlier, we all knew the next case, we all knew this case was going to be about speech. And I have to say, I did find it a little disingenuous, Justice Gorsuch's opinion, to just treat this as a pure speech case, because the reality, he's actually gone way ahead of the rest of the court, actually, on religion cases and on religious freedom, especially in the COVID cases, where he was saying there should be full religious exemptions, even from public health laws. Those public health laws may have been justified or not. Definitely don't want to get there. But to say that there should have just been a religious, exemption was pretty far out there. So, point
number one, keep going.
Here he just kind of waved religion out of it. And it was just like any kind of speech. But then, you make that bed, you have to lie in it. If it's any kind of speech, then we get to like these sort of ridiculous examples, but of like, I'm a web designer and, do I have to do a Nazi website? Do I have to do this and that? Do I have to say political speech that I really disagree with? But, that's where the reductio ad absurdum, going like taking the case to its craziest thing. At the end of the day, like I do think that the status conduct distinction is really the weak link. And where I'll agree with Justice Gorsuch in his criticism of Justice Sotomayor is that she really I don't want to say she waves it away. She does discuss this distinction and the lack of the distinction, but I don't think she really did the seriousness of it that it deserved. And I also think there was a little dismissal. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, Jay, maybe I'm going where you were going to go. I found her dissent really kind of dismissive.
I think she just went very quickly. Justice Gorsuch said she was like inhabiting a different world. And she very quickly pivoted to this being, again, the legal term is a public accommodation case. That's like the hotel or something like that. Yeah. And I do think that Justice Sotomayor is right. I think we probably disagree about that. However, this is always, it's a mixed case. It's a hybrid case. It is about public accommodation because at the end of the day, it is sort of a saying like you can get services if you're one kind of person, not if you're another person. But it's not a pure public accommodation case. It's not the same as Heart of Atlanta Motel. It's not the same as these others. So I still think it's wrong because I think the distinction collapses. However, it is different when it's compelling speech as opposed to, you know, a desegregated restaurant, you know, letting people sit at the lunch counter. That's not the same kind of speech act.
And Jay, I think that's so important and that's why, like, when you go on CNN and you explain this in a 30 or 45-second answer, it's hard to follow. This so demands a long form conversation like this. The most important point is the ruling last week, Gorsuch's ruling. It did not say you can turn away gays. It said you can turn away gay weddings.
You can turn away gay weddings when it's a speech interest.
When it's a speech
still
interest.
Does not,
yes.
You know, a lot of these cases are for-profit wedding chapels. There are a lot of those.
Exactly.
It's like, well, do I have to rent out my for-profit wedding chapel? And when it comes to that, here's what first of all, let me do the rabbi piece before the lawyer piece. You know, Jesus said, a good rabbi always quotes the New Testament, right? Jesus said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's. When you create a business under the laws of the United States, you agree to that business has to obey all kinds of laws, right? And the more I know, you know, the more libertarian you are, the more you dislike all of those laws, whether it's tax stuff and finance stuff and health and safety stuff, and also non-discrimination law. If you don't like the non-discrimination law, the remedy for that in our democratic process is to get that law repealed, is to persuade people that we should not have these non-discrimination laws for one reason or another, and that we shouldn't protect, whether it's women, people of color, gay people, whoever it is. And that's what the democratic process is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be you get to pick and choose which laws you get to obey, and you pick the ones you want. One second, let's just build it out. Because again, so when there's not a speech interest, when it's not that, and this does put me to the left of like the entire Republican Party, but that's where I am anyway. But then I really do think it's render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. You started a company under the corporate laws of the state of wherever you are, and you need to obey all of those laws. And yeah, I get it. You may not like having a same-sex wedding celebrated in your for-profit wedding hall. But last I checked, the Bible doesn't say anything about that anyway. We have gotten on both the left and the right into this kind of culture of grievance where, you know, if I go to Chick-fil-A, it means I'm a homophobe, where if I donate my flowers to a gay wedding, you know, that means that I support, you know, gay marriage. We're having it locally here where I live in New Jersey. There's a bakery, a Jewish bakery, that didn't want to do rainbow pride cupcakes. And, you know, so I think the sort of pile-on that happened against that bakery is also really regrettable. It makes it harder to find common ground, but also this whole notion that like putting a rainbow on a cupcake means that you support the entire LGBTQ and trans agenda. That's crazy. It's Jay, just you're a baker. Put a freaking rainbow on the cupcake.
Okay, but stop, my favorite rabbi. Stop for a minute. That's so fascinating to me. And this is just hitting me in my gut. And I'm with you philosophically on so much, but we can't force a baker, can we, to put a rainbow on a cupcake?
So I should stop and say this thing that the rainbow cupcake is a legal case, it's not a legal case. Sorry, it has not gone to court. It's anything like that. I'm still hopeful. But
imagine it were. Imagine if that went to court.
I haven't thought it through. I think actually it might be status conduct, right? Because they're not turning gay people away. They're just not putting a particular message on it. But it does start to look like the Colorado wedding case and things like that. But apart from the law, this is why I didn't do the law piece yet, right? I still had my rabbi hat on. So I haven't switched from my yarmulke to my like judges, whatever. We don't wear those wigs like in England, you know, that would be much easier for you to tell which Jay is talking. So can we I'd love it if we took a little step down from this culture of rage and grievance that has captured us on both sides of the spectrum. And just like what is really being asked, you know, when you get into some of the nitty gritty, let's go back to the actual case, the website case. They even said, like, what if you just cut and paste language from something else and put it, so you're not writing anything. You don't even, or you could have an employee, or you know what? You can do a screen grab. You're not even cutting and pasting the text. You're literally just taking a thing from website A and putting over, hey, maybe you could now, they didn't say this in the case, but hire some AI to do it. Get ChatGPT to generate the content for this thing. And she still said no. And so the claim, which at first seems so intuitive about our free speech norms and it's un-American to force someone to say something, start to collapse when you look at the many ways that she could have gotten out of this if she wanted to. She could have accommodated anti-discrimination law and also not said anything that she doesn't believe, whether it's for religious or any other reason. So even in this case, it's not that it wouldn't have been rocket science, right? But that's not what her goal was. Her goal was not, not her again. The ADF's goal was not to just accommodate all of these interests. The ADF's goal is to kind of make some marriages more equal than others. And they've stated that, not in those terms, obviously. They've stated that, they fundraise on that they're turning back same-sex marriage. And that's why I think a lot of activists do take that conventional view that this is about a license to discriminate. Because if you just kind of look a little closer, there were a dozen ways that she could have accommodated her religious beliefs and served a same-sex couple. And of course, there was no same-sex couple because, as we said at the top, the whole thing was fake.
Right, even though she didn't know that. But I cede your point. But all of those other ways and things she could have done regarding the speech on that cake or for the wedding would have all still been done in her business's name, her name. And I agree. We don't know what you could easily. There's a big
difference between the business's name and her name, though, right? Like, if I am personally being asked to write something, it's one thing. But this is a business that's being asked. Let's take the most favorable to the left-wing version. They're being asked to cut and paste or put on some standard ChatGPT language with no customization, with no. It does not. I'll do the Hobby Lobby case. When I pay for insurance, it is not me paying for contraception and saying contraception is great. That is the choice of my employee, who may or may not choose to use that insurance coverage for contraception. I am not complicit. These are complicity claims. I'm not complicit in whatever conduct it is that I disagree with. When I offer a service neutrally to everybody, like I may have all kinds of, who knows what goes on in an Airbnb, you know?
Hey, Jay, can I give you a really stupid example just because I love to pick your brain? You've got a Muslim baker, a right-wing anti-Muslim group comes in and says, bake us a cake. Fine. And on the cake, I want you to write or cut and paste or do whatever, Muslims are evil on the top of my cake. Go to it, Muslim baker. In my world, Jay, that Muslim baker should be able to give those Nazis the middle finger and say, get out of here.
Yeah. So first of all, so I'm going to definitely win on your example, but I'll give a better example for your side where you'll win. Okay. So being a Nazi,
damn you, Jay.
Being a Nazi or being a racist or being Islamophobic is not a protected class under the Colorado or any other anti-discrimination law. So that it falls apart. But here's an example. Suppose I'm a rabbi who opens a baker, and a non-bigoted, perfectly innocent Christian couple comes to me and says, I want for my daughter's, let's say it's Catholic, for my daughter's confirmation, I want a cake that has the quote from the Bible that says, the only way to heaven is through me. Right. Jesus is Lord. Christianity is the only true religion. And I face this same ethical conundrum. So there again, now it does come to that status conduct distinction, right? And so I think it now becomes a very close case, just like this one was. And I would actually, in an ideal world, I would search for ways to accommodate both of these interests without giving me, the baker, a kind of blanket no Christians allowed sign. So first of all, I don't think having an employee do something is the same as me doing it. So if I personally feel offended by writing that Christian message, which some might even say is slightly anti-Semitic, but let's even take that out. Let's just say it's just a nice Christian message. Then, I may have an employee who can do it. or I can say I can do what
But
Justice
Jay,
Sotomayor
it's still
suggested,
it's
which
still
is that
Jay's
which
Bakery.
is that that's not. I just don't buy that.
Is that distinction really? I mean, it's
really
still
don't buy
Jay's
it.
Bakery.
I don't buy it. Yeah, it's Jay's Bakery, and we serve all comers. We believe that in a democracy, you don't discriminate, and people put all kinds of stuff on their cakes and other pastries. And
Agreed.
I don't,
Agreed.
I mean, I wouldn't be thrilled from my point of view if somebody came to my bakery and said, put like the 2020 election was stolen, Trump in 2024. I wouldn't love that either. But I don't think the solution is to just allow everybody to sort of opt out. Now, there again, not a protected class, doesn't really apply. But this world in which everything that my business puts out.
Can I stop you for a second?
You just did.
And I want you to you're going to slap me upside the head, and I want you to.
You're too far away.
I agree with what you were just going to say. We can't let everybody just opt out of our public accommodation laws. I agree with that. But we also can't allow compelled speech in this country. And I don't know how you get around that.
I mean, I think compelled speech is not the frame that I think is the right way to describe what's going on. So speech, as we're talking about, we've talked about in other contexts a lot lately. There's a lot of different kinds of speech and free speech, right? You can't shout fire in a crowded theater. Okay. That is compelled non-speech. Right. You're not allowed to, you're not allowed. We allow compelled speech and non-speech. Well, at least non-speech all of the time, so commercial speech, which is what this qualifies under, is one of the least protected forms of speech. So, for example, if I'm Burger King, I can't say McDonald's burgers are made with dog shit. Right. I am not allowed to say that. I can't say things that are not true about my own burgers either. So I can't, I have to actually so there's all kinds of regulations on what kind of speech. Now, again, this is an affirmatively compelled speech act. However, there's a way in which that framing really distorts what's going on. I mean, this is a business. It is a for-profit business. Unlike the cake, there are very non-invasive ways, the cut and paste, the ChatGPT, to get the website done without endorsing it. And I guess maybe we do disagree about the Jay's Bakery thing. I just don't believe that.
I don't know how you make that distinction.
I don't believe that every cake that comes out of my bakery, by the way, I have a 5-year-old daughter, we bake all the time, so this is very personal for me. I don't believe that every message on every cake is my message. I am not complicit in whatever that message is. I'm running a business. It says I can't one of the many requirements that I have to obey by is I can't discriminate on the basis of religion. Now, arguably, in the case that the hypothetical that I gave, which I think is harder than your one, I might make the same argument that the web designer made. All Christians are allowed here. I just can't write this message that, is theologically, but I still think that's wrong. I still think that's wrong.
Jay, is this a stupid simplification of your learned stance? I know you agree with me that in this country, the state cannot compel me, Joe Walsh, private citizen, to say or write something I don't want to say. Are you then saying, though, that when Joe Walsh opens up a business down the street, I have to put that compelled speech notion on the shelf?
I'm almost saying yes to that. And maybe
oh,
that is...
man, do you know that kills me? That kills the libertarian me.
I don't think so. The corporate form is a creation of government. It's a creation of law. There's no God-given right to have a corporation and pay 15% tax instead of 30% tax or have limited liability or whatever. This is all make-believe, right? This is all a creation of American law. And when you choose to set up an establishment under that rule of law, you're doing it with all of the rules of law. Now, again, I don't want a world in which people of religious beliefs can't enter various professions. That doesn't feel like the America that I want.
But what you're saying,
however,
Jay, is that
this
you
is in very limited cases, right? These are expressive. The only time where this gets hard is in these very edge cases where there is an expressive act that to not do it would discriminate against people. And I said at the beginning that the web designer case is hard. I do think it's hard. But again, that's where, because it's only on these edge cases, that's why I look for the workarounds, right? And I don't think the workaround is a cop-out. I think the workaround is the right kind of accommodation. Look, another option, I don't think religious exemptions to civil rights laws are a good idea legislatively either, but at least the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and which now exists in 20 odd states around the country, and which makes it basically would side for the bakers of the world and the web designers of the world. That's at least a function of democracy. Right. So more or less anyway. So that is right. That's a legislature deciding we want to protect vulnerable populations, but we also want to accommodate religious beliefs. So again, I tend not to, I'm almost always against those also, but I'm against them as a citizen. Right. And if I understand, when, these exemptions are basically in red states, right? The populations of red states want these exemptions. This isn't like some sinister anti-democratic thing happening. These are states which do want to protect vulnerable populations, but also want to protect religious speech. And at least those are part of a democratic process. But to allow individual businesses to kind of opt out and to say that is a slippery slope, and that is a slippery slope to turn away the gays or turn away the Muslims or turn away the Jews. And, I think it was the sort of Justice Sotomayor's analogy. I forget exactly what it was, but you can't have a straight people only web design shop, but not think you're going to end up having a white people only establishment of one kind
completely.
or another. And so when there's that danger of a real slippery slope to something that we don't want, I look for those accommodations. And by the way, on the cake shop case, we didn't get to this, but on the wedding baker, they even said, how about you don't even make the cake, but you just have the cake there, and then we'll get someone else. You bake us the cake, actually, is what, right? You bake us the cake, we'll get someone else to design it, right? So we can still get your delicious cake, Masterpiece Cake Shop, but we'll take it, and then we'll get some, and he still said no. Ultimately, that's the thing. It's like when you keep digging down, ultimately they do want to turn people away. That is what's basically happening. And I get that I'm fully here with you to have the free speech conversation. And I've defended that, in public over the last week. And at the same time, I'm not naive, right? These organizations don't like these changes in society for religious reasons. They don't think it's a good idea. They don't think my family is valid, and they want to denigrate my family. And that is basically what they want. So like, while I'm here for the free speech limitation and so forth, I'm also not naive as to what these goals are.
And again, because I come from that world, Jay, I agree with you completely on their motivation. Completely agree. I'm stuck here, and I really so appreciate your honest answer in that, in not so many words. The government can't compel me to say something, but if I open a business, there may be some restrictions to my free speech rights because I opened a business. And I would also say, look, we also suppose I have, bigoted beliefs, about some group, whatever group it is. I am free to have those bigoted beliefs, right? The government is not
able to come here. But if I open a business and someone from whatever group it is that I dislike applies for a job, that's where my freedom ends, where somebody else's dignity begins, right? The original religious exemptions in this country were about places where there was no third-party harm. There was no victim. Like if the Jehovah's Witness wouldn't salute the flag and say the Pledge of Allegiance, maybe that hurts us all in some aggregate way, but there's no specific victim, right? And that's the way it was until Hobby Lobby. The court had never found that one person's religious beliefs took precedence over the equality interests of somebody else until that case. And that was, right, that was in the context of contraception and the contraception mandate. And so I just think, again, when we create a business, we create a business subject to a lot of laws. And there should be workarounds for these tough cases.
And are you then, because then I get stuck, when you create a business, the state can compel you to speak. In
very, 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 very limited instances. Give me one other instance.
And this could be one. And this could be one of them.
This
right?
could be one of them where there's an accommodation present, and the state could require not compelling speech, because you keep using that phrase, which I get. It's a good phrase, but where there's a different way for the state to accommodate the equality interest and the liberty interest, then yes, there should be some way that might be imposed. So again, there's a ton of options that were open to this web designer, and she could have chosen to do that. And honestly, she could even choose a lot lower impact ones. She could just call it like the Christ is King web design service. I really doubt that a lot of gay couples are going to come to her anyway, right? And there I do agree with the libertarians. Like, she could put her cards on the table, let the market decide, and then in the weird case that some gay couple decided to do it, then there's some accommodation.
So, Jay, in your eyes, there's a gradation here. There's a same-sex wedding, and they want to rent chairs and tables. The owner of that company cannot deny the chairs and tables to be rent to the same-sex wedding. I agree. There's a same-sex wedding, and the florist, because the florist doesn't support same-sex weddings, tries to turn down floral arrangements for the wedding. Well, that's more of a gray area, and you may be compelled to do that. And then you get into the final thing, which is kind of the speech area, where the same-sex wedding wants the web designer to design a website with language that really goes against him. It's almost like there's a gradation here.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I think that's right. And that's, again, I said at the start, this is a tough case.
And see, and again, if I were with you right now, I'd give you a big kiss on the forehead, because you acknowledged that from the start, that you in essence acknowledge that gradation from the start, that this is complicated. And we're talking about a slim number of cases here.
This
right?
is the other thing, right? Look, I mean, what's ridiculous here, right? So we could have a whole other episode on what's going on around trans populations in this country. I don't know where we agree or where we disagree.
I'm woke Joe Walsh.
Oh, that's nice. All right, that's great. Anyway, just as a matter of the fact, there's a lot of people in a lot of danger, right?
Yeah.
And this sort of backlash against trans people has caught a lot of innocent people in the crosshairs, and it's outrageous what's happening. And I don't care about a same-sex couple that goes to a web designer and suffers some dignitary harm, but that's not really just what this case is about, right? And so when we're sort of having a battle in this like free speech zone, but you and I both know that's not the real battle, right? It's like that's like the weapons that are being used in the battle.
Agreed.
And so there's it's this sort of weird twilight zone where, and I think, again, because I'm both the rabbi and the lawyer journalist, people get really angry, not just like upset and offended and eggshells and snowflakes, but like they get really fucking pissed off, right? About, these issues, which are non-issues. And when we kind of come back to humanity, so when I was doing LGBT activism in religious communities, this was 12 years ago, 13, 14 years ago, even, because we're all getting old. It was kind of like, can we just take some of this legal culture war stuff and set it on the side and see each other as people, And we have seen among middle America, right? Not just like happy woke liberals in Brooklyn, but like middle America, we have seen a huge evolution, right? As people have like been human beings and opened up to at least their gay and lesbian and bisexual friends and family members, still working on the trans part. And they have come to see them as people. They have come to understand things, whether it's love is love or however they understand it. And the moral, and we saw the same thing, and it's still evolving, obviously, in civil rights for people of color in this country. Human decency has a lot more capacity for change than activist groups on the right and left arguing about the application of First Amendment law. And this is where I would love to see our focus.
Jay, that was beautifully put. Completely. Are we going to see... what's going to happen now? Are we going to see more cases like this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to say, I'm usually a pessimist. I think the glass is half empty and the water is evaporating.
I'm a dark fucking Irishman. So, you can't compete with me, mister.
Dude, the Jews have had it rough too. I know
that's true.
You've had your famines, but I think we can go toe to toe on this one.
I give it to you.
Anyway, however, in a lot of these cases, I ultimately am an optimist. I do think that the Supreme Court, these are, no offense to people like you and me, but these are old people. They are out of step with this country where people are. They're fighting yesterday's battles. They may win yesterday's battles because this is a court that has been, we don't need to go into whether it's stacked or not, whatever. This is definitely a court that has a certain ideological view and is put there for particular reasons. And they are fulfilling the mission of the people who put them into their...
Hey, Jay. my former political party is out of step with where this fucking country is. My base, my people are middle-aged and older white people. This is like their last gasp. I agree with you on that. Life's changing. People are tolerant. People like DeSantis. Most Americans are not intolerant pricks like he is.
And it's fun, he's using I always, with DeSantis, it's so interesting because he's picking up some things that are really good ways to talk about it. Like, we're all concerned about our children. We all want schools that are safe for them. We don't want kids being indoctrinated in schools. But then he gets so over his skis, right? It's like, well, we're going to ban all trans health. We're going to ban all these books from the library. We're like, no more To Kill a Mockingbird in the school library. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? And so ultimately, yes, to answer your question, we will see more cases like this. The next case may be something else. I think where some of the frontiers might actually be in coverage of same-sex spouses in insurance plans, and where the sort of rubber hits the road economically. We did, I think it was in Justice Sotomayor's dissent, she had an idea of a funeral home, like a small, because funeral homes often are small family-owned businesses, right? So will funeral homes accommodate gay couples? Can they turn gay couples away? I got to say, that case is going to be good for my side, because if you look to an average human being and say where your empathy lies, it's going to be with the bereaved same-sex, if it's two women and it's going to be with the widow and not, with the funeral home. But these are some of the places we've already seen the courts have moved the sticks on adoption. And look, it's very personal for me. My partner and I had our child through surrogacy, and we chose to do it in a state that had much more favorable laws because we're economically privileged and we can fly across the country to do that. But it's now very risky to consider adopting or building a same-sex family because the sticks are being moved there as well. Are the votes there to overturn same-sex marriage as a federal level? Will marriage look like abortion looks now, where it's legal in some states and not legal in others?
No.
The votes, it's really hard to call. I wrote one article in 2022 saying stop worrying about marriage, and then I wrote another one saying the court is coming for marriage. So I've just had it both ways. Luckily, the internet has a really short attention span, and so I said both within a 6-month period. But after reading some of these cases, even if the marriage right remains on paper, the way it gets kind of degraded, that it's marriage but not quite equal in a lot of different ways, that also is something that's already happening.
I want to close with you with two questions. One, the last one will be broader. What then, Jay, ultimately is the answer in the minority of these very specialized cases, like this Colorado web designer? What ultimately is the answer? My default is always to not compel speech, but are these, we're going to see a few of these and it's just a case by case thing?
I think the goal that I've failed at in this conversation is to get you to get you off that phrase compel speech.
What would you replace it with? Replace it.
The language that it's more mealy-mouthed, I admit. It's not as good of a phrase, but it's accommodating all of the interests, accommodating the free speech interest and accommodating the
mealy-mouthed.
No, it's mealy-mouthed. I apologize for that, but don't compel my speech. I'm going to stay with my mealy-mouthed frame of that. I reckon, and look, there are some who, maybe further left than I am, who would just be like, fuck this speech claim, right? You've opened a business, you got to serve all comers. There is a clarity to that position. And that says you can say whatever the hell you want, but when you hang out a shingle, meaning when you incorporate under the laws of the state of Colorado, you are agreeing. And they would say, this is not my view, but they would say very clearly, you are no longer just a free person individually, you are operating a corporation. And that is why it's a public accommodations case, because you're hanging out.
That's anathema to me. To me, you're no longer an American.
But I don't agree. I mean, I think, look, go back to the personal racist who still has to hire in a non-racist way. That may be really offensive to them, right? Bigots are, easily offended, right? So, they may be really offended by having to check their, bigoted beliefs at the door and hire on the basis of merit and not on the basis of their own prejudices. Yeah, I get that, but tough shit, right? I mean, you opened that business, and you opted in. And that's the tough shit, is on the legal side. On the religious side, I understand it, again, as rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's. We should understand, that metaphor. I don't know how much time we have, but, the coin of the realm in Rome had the picture of the emperor on it and was venerated. The emperor was venerated as a god. This wasn't just like using money. It's being complicit and participating in idolatry, right? And there were people who had, at the time, they said, we're not going to use these coins. We're basically saying that Caesar is God, and we're not going to say that. That's not true. God is God and Caesar is not. Jesus is a pretty good authority for me. He's like, I get it, but we are also, he didn't say this explanation, but we are also subjects of the Roman Empire. We are part of this non-democratic, but part of this state, nation, empire. And so we render unto Caesar's, we obey the laws of the land. And the same thing is true in the Jewish tradition, just it's not as well phrased, that the laws of the land become the laws of your religion. And if the laws of the land, maybe the laws of the land shouldn't include an anti-discrimination law, or maybe they should have some religious exemption. But the people have decided that they will have anti-discrimination. There's not a religious exemption. And so you are opting in when you open that business to obey the laws of the land. So I don't think you're no longer American. I think you're quintessentially American, because you're obeying the rule of law in a democracy, which I understand in your former party is an unpopular view.
Well, and as a libertarian,
all that stuff.
Yeah, fuck my former party. As a libertarian, it's a troublesome view. But I'm going to ask you two more questions.
And I want to agree. By the way, I just want to agree. It is a troublesome view. That's what I mean by hard case. That's why I desperately search for any accommodation that is not going to quote unquote compel speech, a way to weasel around these consequences. That's what I want. I want the weaseling, because I recognize that it's troublesome, but it's an edge case, and most cases are not like this.
And I've read your stuff for a long time. And clearly I've been through a bizarre fucking political road. But I proudly woke, and the libertarian that I am, and love all God's children. And but I'm a straight white guy. I want to ask you, a gay white guy, a gay white Jewish rabbi guy, lawyer.
More identities, pile them on.
I'm going to pile them on you, mister. Are you confident? Like, if you imagined a world without non-discrimination laws, where I open up a hot dog shop down the street and I say, we serve only straight people, or we serve only gay people, are you confident that the market would drive those fucking businesses out of business in America in 2023?
So this is like the third time where I have two answers. No, I'm not confident about that. But even if I were, I'm not as much of a libertarian that I think that that's how core fundamental shared values should be decided. The market can decide a lot of things. I'm also not a socialist, right? So I'm not anti the market deciding things. But when it comes to people's core dignity as human beings and as equal citizens in our democracy, I do not want to leave that to the market to decide.
Last question, and it goes again to how bullish or bearish or optimistic you are. You've kind of convinced me on this, Jay, because it's like, and again, I come from the Republican Party base, and we're mostly talking about middle-aged, older white people. And you know this, everything I'm going to tell you, you know, it's like in their heads, their lives have changed in a nanosecond. Now anybody can marry anybody, and there are 100 different genders, and you can't say Merry Christmas. And this is all the shit they've told me now for years. But I look at the enormous progress we've made. And I know I'm wrong, but wasn't it even only like 15 years ago, Obama and Hillary opposed same-sex marriage? I could be off by a few years. So it seems like everything's been happening fast. And you've got these middle-aged, older white people out there that are kind of confused and concerned and maybe bigoted and all the rest. And then people like me, and I've apologized publicly, inflamed some of these people. But I don't think that's where most of America is. So maybe you have a right to be optimistic.
Yeah, I was more optimistic a few years ago. I think
really
the persistence. some of the stuff that was interesting coming out of the 2020 election around Fox News and in the lawsuit was their kind of, I used to have maybe a liberal's naive view of Fox News, like sinister people pushing propaganda on the masses. But to see how market driven it actually was in those internal documents, to see people like Tucker Carlson, worrying about ratings numbers and like we're pissing off our audience.
Bingo.
That made me feel really dark, actually. It is true that demographically that audience will decline, soon. But because I want to honor, again, this comes from my activist work in the past. Like, this sounds very corny. I'm sorry for this phrase I'm about to say. I want to honor the journey. I really get that people are on a journey of conscience, and that particularly the kind of cancel culture on the left and the sort of meanness, like if you say the wrong thing or you misgender someone, that means you suck.
You're gone.
Right?
Yeah.
That is not the way to help people on that journey. Right. So again, I am committed to the journey. Like, I'm not saying it's okay to misgender someone. I'm not saying it's definitely not okay. But this idea that we like jump on, so like there is not the right kind of support for people doing the hard work. And we saw it back in those same-sex marriage years. I was involved in activism at that point, and there were sincere, I didn't care about the bigots. I've been heckled. I've been trolled. I get those people. Fuck those people. I care about the people who are sincerely actually troubled. Right. Yeah. And maybe they have some like bigoted little thoughts in there, but we all have bigoted thoughts. Right. So they're working on it. Right. And those are the people who I want to reach. Right. The sort of the reasonable people. And what I found so distressing, I think, around some of that stuff that came out around the election was how much profit there was to be made by speaking to the worst aspects of ourselves, right? The parts that's the most afraid of change, because what I'd love to see is like more of a national conversation of like, yeah, I get it. I mean, I grew up in the 80s. Like, it looked very different. It was not as diverse. Like, there were different views. Like, there was not as much, I grew up in Florida, so there was like Spanish spoken, but it was not like it. I get it. It's changed. Like, and that change to the left, like, dismisses often any of that fear, or not even fear, but just discomfort with change is bigotry. It's discomfort. And, I have a side gig. I teach meditation. And so when people are feeling that discomfort, like, you want to like recognize it for what it is. You don't end there. You work with it. But when instead that discomfort is being weaponized, whether it's by Fox or further right organizations, media organizations, and politicians. And if that's what you want to do, there's a phrase in like the spiritual world, like, your heart has the seed of love and the seed of hate or whatever, and it depends which one you water. Right. And if we water the seed of hate, we're going to be very hateful human beings. And I've been really troubled by the incentives that some people have to water that seed of hate, because I do believe, again, I don't know if I can reach a far crazy, MAGA person or something, but, most people are much more reasonable than that. And I think we can look to the better angels of our nature, and I'm disturbed that there are so many people making so much money doing the opposite.
Oh, boy. Completely agree. The money they're making, the market out there. But again, I hold to this, Jay. That's the world I come from. It really just feels like a last dying gasp of that world. It could last a long time, though. Could last quite some time.
But, hate's never going to go away. Anger's never going to go away. It may find a different expression. And it just... the rise of, again, whether it's whatever we're going to call it, nationalism, ethno-nationalism, populism, whatever, that seemed to come out of nowhere. But it's been simmering along.
It was there.
And that is, seems like an existential threat. Certainly to our democracy, and we're headed into an election, in which someone who's promised to, weaponize the government explicitly against political enemies, pulling over 50% in his primary, that to me feels really scary. And I do, just to tie it up for you, because, for the episode, like it's not that far from this grievance culture that we talked about earlier. That's in the background of this case. and the way we sort of harden into these positions rather than look for ways to accommodate the competing interests and honor the different interests. I actually think, like I said about the cake shop case, the court was right when the Civil Rights Commission just blew off that baker's religious objections, being like, that's just a pretext for bigotry. That is not the way it's supposed to work. We need to recognize the real hardcore speech and religion interests that are there, that are sincere. But again, they may have been sincere in the 60s among the racists also. Just because somebody has a religious belief that may be sincere, that doesn't mean it gets to take away the rights of others. So we want to look at both sides of this difficult interaction.
I'm going to use the word again that you don't like, compelled
speech.
But this is why, jerk, no, in another context, this is why I find you such a compelling voice. Jay Michaelson, a great piece, by the way, in the Daily Beast about this ruling. He's a columnist for the Rolling Stone. You can catch him on CNN. The book, Jay, God vs. Gay, ? When did that come out?
It's 2011, I think. It's a while ago.
Okay.
But it's funny, on trans issues, I may just write the same book. All I have to do is cut and paste,
should.
Because it does feel there again, it's a whole other topic, but we're missing, there's a tendency to demonize people's uncertainty and well-meaning ignorance. I don't even mean it in a negative way. It's new to people. And we need a better way than what we've been doing so far.
Agreed. And follow him. Follow Jay on Twitter, Jay Michaelson.
Or on Threads.
Get on Threads. If you're not on there yet, Jay, get on Threads. It's growing by leaps and bounds. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
To be
really
continued.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow White Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been White Flag with Joe Walsh.
I found it. Look, I love ice cream, but I'm not 18 years old anymore, so I can't eat a lot of it. But I found it. I found a healthy ice cream alternative that actually tastes great. Sweet pea non-dairy ice cream. Get this. It's made with chickpeas. I know. It tastes great. Tastes and feels like real ice cream. Look, I screwed around with soy-based and oat-based products. They all tasted like shit. Sweet pea made from chickpeas is the first healthy alternative I've found that I absolutely love. I'm in DC. I get sweet pea at Giant Foods. If you're in DC, Philly, Pennsylvania, go to Giant Food stores. If you're in New York City, go to Balducci or Key Foods. In San Francisco, go to Nugget. You will absolutely love this. It tastes great. Made with chickpeas. That's so cool. It tastes great.